Sometimes the things people mock us for are the very things that make us irreplaceable. May was 50 years old when the whispers followed her like dust on the wind. She's barren, worthless, too old for love. They sold her off as if she were no more than worn-out stock, unwanted, unloved, unseen. The townsfolk laughed, certain her story had already ended. But what they didn't see was the quiet strength she carried in her chest. The kind born from decades of sorrow survived in silence. When Cyrus Bell, a widower with 4 children, stood before her, his words cut through the cruelty like sunlight through storm clouds. "That's why I need you." The crowd thought he was mad. What use was a woman who could never give him more children? But Cyrus wasn't looking for more mouths to feed. He was looking for a heart strong enough to hold the pieces of a broken family together. And yet May had no idea what awaited her. 4 children, each carrying wounds deeper than their years. A son who refused to look at her, a town that whispered behind her back, and a fire in the night that nearly stole everything. She had been sold for being useless. She was mocked for what she could never give. But soon the barren woman the world discarded would prove that love isn't measured by bloodlines. It's measured by the courage to stay, to nurture, to believe when no one else will. The question is, what happens when a woman, everyone abandoned, dares to plant hope in a house where grief still lingers? Will May's tenderness heal the cracks left behind by death, betrayal, and bitterness? Or will the past, the cruel father, the wagging tongues, the hungry neighbors rise again to test whether her love is enough? This is not just a tale about a barren woman. It's about second chances, about late-in-life love, and about finding worth not in what the world takes from you, but in what you choose to give. What comes next for May, Cyrus, and the children? Will the woman who was once sold for nothing become the very heart of a family that needed her all along? They nailed a notice on the boarding house door, the way men might tack up a poster for a stray mule. May Ellison's name was written there, chalked in a hand that never cared for curves or kindness. $2 owed, $2 settled if taken. At 50, May had learned how to stand without shaking. She folded her hands not to hide them, but to keep them from showing the ache that lived in her bones. Townsfolk whispered behind her back, barren, useless, no family to claim her. Their words clung like burrs, yet she carried herself with the calm of a church bell on a windless morning, silent but impossible to ignore. Her life had been a map of refusals. A man once told her she was too old for love. Another had pressed her into a marriage she escaped before it killed her. Children never came. Instead, she raised gardens, baked bread for neighbors, stitched quilts that kept others warm, while her own nights were cold. Always giving, never chosen. Now, with debts twisted by lies, she was sold. She stood on the boarding house steps like a relic no one wanted, eyes fixed on the far hills. Then he appeared. Cyrus Bell, a widower whose quiet voice carried more weight than a preacher's shout. He had 4 children tugging at his shadow, 4 faces hollowed by the loss of their mother. Cyrus stepped forward, set a pouch of coins on the table, and said in a voice steady as stone, "I'll settle her debt. But I'm not here to buy a person," the keeper sputtered. "Then what do you mean to do?" Cyrus turned to May. His eyes held no pity, only something firm enough to stand on. "My house has 4 children who need more than food. They need kindness without condition. If you'd share a meal with us, ma'am, there's a chair at our table. No bargain, no bond. Just a place if you'd take it." The crowd muttered, confused. But May felt her ribs expand with a breath she hadn't taken in years. No one had ever asked her, not claimed, not judged, but asked. She lifted her chin. "I'll come," she said softly. "To see." Cyrus nodded once like a man sealing a covenant. He held out his coat not as possession, but as shelter. She stepped off the block, past the stairs and whispers, into the open air that suddenly smelled less of dust and more of beginnings. Behind them, the town hummed with gossip. Ahead, a house waited with too many echoes. May walked beside the quiet man who hadn't tried to own her. And though the prairie wind still bit cold, something inside her warmed small but steady, like the first coal in a long-dead fire. A door had opened. Without a lock, could it truly be hers to walk through? The Bell homestead sat on the edge of the prairie, where the fields bent into the woods, a weathered clapboard house with shutters that leaned like tired shoulders. May Ellison followed Cyrus Bell up the path, her boots sinking in the late winter mud. 4 children stood on the porch wide-eyed. The eldest, Thomas, barely 15, wore his father's jaw, and a suspicion too heavy for his youth. Beside him, Ellen, 12, clutched her mother's apron like it was still warm with breath. The younger ones, Clara and James, peeked from behind the rail, half curious, half afraid. Cyrus cleared his throat. "Children, this is Miss May. She's come to supper." The words sounded ordinary, yet May felt the weight of them. Not a servant, not a debt repaid, not a barren woman too old for use. Just a guest with a name. Inside the house smelled of wood smoke and loneliness. The table bore bread gone hard and beans boiled too thin. May slipped off her shawl and quietly set her hands to work, warming the bread, stirring the pot, adding sprigs of dried thyme she found hanging from the rafters. She moved as if she had always belonged to kitchens, to hunger softened by touch. The children watched her, their silence louder than any chatter. At last Clara whispered, "She cooks like Mama." May's throat tightened, but she smiled. Every pot can carry a little comfort if you stir it long enough. Cyrus sat at the head of the table, eyes lowered as if unsure what bargain he had struck. He had brought May home because of necessity, because 4 children needed a steady hand. But now, as the scent of herbs filled the room and his children leaned forward without fear, he wondered if something else had walked through the door, hope in a shape he hadn't expected. After supper, Ellen brought May a quilt to mend. The edges were frayed, the fabric worn thin from winters spent pulling it too close. May threaded her needle steady even in the dim lamplight. She hummed a hymn under her breath, a tune soft enough to quiet the restless air. The children drifted closer, drawn by the sound. Thomas still stood back, arms crossed, watching her like a guard who hadn't yet decided if she was friend or threat. But James leaned against her knee, eyelids heavy, and May let her song carry him towards sleep. When the quilt was folded and the children tucked into their narrow beds, Cyrus lingered at the doorway. "You didn't have to do all that," he said quietly. May looked up, her hands folded in her lap. "I didn't do it because I had to." For a long time they said nothing. The fire popped, a single coal shifting. Outside, the wind rattled against the shutters. Inside, something gentler stirred, something neither dared name. May thought of all the houses she had left, all the doors that had closed behind her. This one did not close. It stood ajar, not yet welcoming, not yet secure, but open enough for her to breathe. She had entered as a stranger, but could she ever be more than that to children still grieving and a man who carried silence like armor? The first weeks passed like slow water over stone. May woke early, her body moving with the rhythm of years spent working in other people's homes, stoking fires, kneading dough, mending torn shirts. Yet here each task felt different. Not duty, but offering. Not survival, but service freely chosen. Still shadows lingered. Thomas watched her with narrowed eyes, every kindness measured, as if it were currency he could not trust. He caught her once humming while she brushed James's hair, and his voice cut sharp across the room. "You're not our mother." The words pierced deeper than he knew. May's hand stilled, but she did not answer. She only placed the brush aside and kissed the boy's crown, gentle as rain. That night she wept quietly in the barn, not for herself, but for children who had learned too soon to guard their hearts like grown men. Cyrus noticed. He always noticed, though he rarely spoke. He would find her lingering by the window, eyes on the horizon, and ask softly, "Are you well?" She would smile, small, practiced. "Well enough," and he would nod, though he knew it was not the whole truth. The neighbors whispered too. In town, May caught the glances, the mutters, "That's her. The barren one. Sold off like a mule. What's Bell thinking, bringing her into his house?" She carried their words like stones in her apron. But each evening, when Clara pressed a flower into her palm, or Ellen asked her to braid her hair before sleep, she felt those stones lift, if only for a while. Yet the greatest battle was within herself. For years, May had been told she was less. Less of a woman, less of a wife, because her womb had not carried life. The lie clung to her like smoke. But here in the small things, the way James ran to her, when he scraped his knee, the way the house smelled of bread, again the way Cyrus lingered longer at the table, as if reluctant to rise, she began to wonder if there was more to her worth than what had been denied. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the prairie, Cyrus spoke what had hung unsaid. "May," he began, voice low, "I know what folks say about you, About me for bringing you here. But I didn't ask you because I needed a wife in name. I asked because I needed someone who wouldn't leave, someone steady. And I see that in you." Her throat tightened. "And the children they'll learn. Trust takes time." His eyes shadowed with grief softened. "But they already see it even if they fight it." May turned away, tears burning her lashes. She wasn't sure if she was strong enough to believe him or to believe herself. That night when she tucked the quilt around James, he stirred and mumbled, half dreaming, "Good night, Mama." May's breath caught. She pressed her hand to her chest where the ache and the hope wrestled. She kissed his forehead and whispered back, "Good night, my boy." For the first time, the word Mama did not sting like loss. It felt like a seed. But could May allow herself to believe it might grow? The spring thaw came early that year. The snow melted into thick rivers of mud, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine. Life on the homestead demanded every hand chopping wood, mending fences, tending to livestock. May rose before dawn each day, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, her hands cracked but steady. She had long ago stopped measuring her worth by what she could not give. Here she measured it by what she could. But shadows lingered still. Thomas the eldest carried his grief like a weapon. Some mornings he would not come to the table until May had left the room. Other times his words struck like stones. "You're not her. You'll never be." The words pierced deep, but May bore them in silence. She understood that grief is sharpest in the young, for they do not yet know how to soften it with memory. Still, each time he spoke, the wound inside her threatened to tear open again. One evening after Thomas stormed from supper, Cyrus found her sitting alone on the porch, hands folded in her lap, like a woman awaiting judgment. "He's just a boy," Cyrus said gently. May's eyes glistened in the twilight. "No, he's right. I'll never be their mother, and no matter how many loaves I bake or shirts I mend, I cannot fill that place." Cyrus sat beside her, his large frame bent, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew loss too well. "May, I didn't ask you to replace her. I asked you to stand with us. That's different. What the children need is not a ghost returned, but a woman who chooses them." Her voice trembled. "But what if I fail them? What if all I am is a burden again?" Cyrus turned, then his gaze holding hers until she could not look away. "A burden, May? You're the reason this house feels alive again. Do you know how long it's been since laughter echoed in these walls? Since the fire stayed lit past sundown? You've given us more than you know." For the first time, May allowed herself to hear his words, not as kindness meant to soothe, but as truth meant to anchor. Yet the world outside their home was not so forgiving. One Sunday she dared to walk into town beside Cyrus and the children. Whispers rippled through the pews as she entered the small wooden church. A woman's hiss carried down the aisle. "That's her, the Barren one. Sold like cattle. No place for her here." May's cheeks burned. She clutched Clara's small hand tighter, trying to stand tall though her knees quivered. At the sermon's end, as the congregation drifted toward the door, one man sneered loud enough for all to hear, "Bell could have had any woman. And he chose one who couldn't even give him a son." The insult hung like smoke. May's breath faltered, but before she could step aside, Cyrus's voice rose steady, unflinching. "I chose her," he said, his hand resting firm on May's shoulder. His eyes swept the crowd. "And I'd choose her again. Because what this family needed wasn't another child. It was someone who could love the ones already here." The church fell silent. Some turned away in shame, others in scorn. But May, standing under the weight of his words, felt something loosen in her chest. That evening, as the children drifted to sleep, Thomas lingered in the doorway. His voice was rough, awkward, but it carried a crack of surrender. "I heard what Pa said at church, and I don't hate you, May. I just don't know how not to miss her." May's eyes blurred. She crossed the room slowly, then knelt so her eyes met his. "You don't have to stop missing her, Thomas. You only have to let me stay beside you while you do." For the first time, he did not pull away. In the fragile silence between them, May felt something shift, not victory, but the beginning of trust. Yet trust is a tender flame, and shadows threaten still. The days grew longer, spring swelling into the thick green of summer. The Bell homestead seemed almost to breathe again. The garden May planted with Clara began to bloom rows of beans, curling toward the sun squash, spreading wide tomatoes, climbing tall stakes Cyrus had driven deep into the soil. The children began to laugh, more often, Sarah singing as she swept Ben chasing chickens through the yard, Clara twirling with ribbons of wildflowers in her hair. But not all storms come from skies. Some rise from within hearts left untended. One humid evening, the heat heavy and restless, Thomas returned from town with fists clenched. He'd overheard boys his age sneering, "Your new mama's barren. No wonder your pa had to buy her." Their words cut not just into May, but into him, and shame tangled with the grief he still carried. At supper, he flung his spoon down the clatter loud enough to make Clara jump. "Why'd you come here? Why didn't you just stay gone? We didn't ask for you." The words sliced through the air sharp as a blade. Silence followed. Cyrus's jaw tightened. Ben stared at his plate, Sarah's eyes filled with tears. May sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She felt the old wound opening again, the chorus of voices that had named her unworthy, useless, a woman of no value. For a moment she almost believed it. But then she looked at Thomas, not at his anger, but at the pain hiding beneath it. She saw herself in that pain, the child who had once begged for love, and found none, the woman who had been sold away, because her body could not do what the world demanded. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "Thomas," she said softly, "you're right. You didn't ask for me. You lost someone who can never be replaced. And it's not fair that another woman is here in her place." The boy's face flushed, his fists still tight. "But hear me." May continued, her hand reaching across the table, though it didn't quite touch his. "I am not here to take your mother away. I could never. I am here because I was given away too. And I thought I had nothing left. But your father, he didn't see what I lacked. He saw what I could give. And I want to give it to you. Not as your mother, if you can't bear that word, but as May, someone who will not leave, someone who will choose you again and again." Silence held the table. Cyrus's eyes burned with quiet pride. Thomas swallowed hard. For the first time, his shoulders dropped, the fight leaving him like water pouring from a bucket. His voice cracked, a whisper, more than a word, "I miss her." May's throat tightened. "Then let's miss her together." He did not answer, but when she rose to clear the dishes, he didn't stop her hand when it brushed his shoulder. That night a storm swept across the plains. Thunder rolled like drums in a canyon. Lightning split the sky, and rain lashed the earth. The children huddled together, eyes wide at the crash of heaven's anger. Cyrus stoked the fire, steady as stone, but May gathered the children close, her arms sheltering them. "Do storms scare you?" Clara whispered. May kissed the top of her head. "Not anymore. Storms pass, and when they do, they leave the world washed clean. And in that cabin with the fire glowing warm against the storm, something inside May broke free, the years of silence, of shame, of believing herself less than whole. She realized she was not a woman defined by absence. She was a woman who had survived, who had chosen kindness despite cruelty, who had endured and still loved. Cyrus caught her gaze across the room. In his eyes she saw not pity, but reverence, as though he too had been waiting for this release. When the thunder faded and the rain softened to a lullaby, May felt something new settle deep inside her. Not fear, not doubt, but a quiet strength. She belonged here. The storm passed, but May knew the real test was not over. Shadows from the past still lingered, and love, true love, demanded courage she had not yet given. The days after the storm carried a strange stillness, as though the land itself had paused to take a deep breath. Crops stretched taller, wildflowers shimmered in the sun, and laughter returned little by little to the Bell household. But May knew the world outside their fence was not so easily softened. Whispers followed her when she went to town with Cyrus for supplies. She heard them as she filled the flour sack or waited at the blacksmith's, poor fellow, stuck with a barren woman. Can't imagine a woman past her years raising 4 mouths. Bought her for less than a mule, I hear. Each word landed like a pebble in her chest, small but heavy, gathering into a weight she carried home. Cyrus heard them too. His jaw tightened, and sometimes he opened his mouth as though to strike back. But May would touch his sleeve and shake her head. Let them talk, she'd whisper. Yet when she lay awake at night, she wondered if she truly believed those words or if she was still pretending strength. The children noticed too. Clara clung tighter to her. Ben grew more protective, and Sarah asked questions May could not answer. Why do people say bad things when you've only been kind? But Thomas remained distant. He did not lash out again, but his silence was a wall May could not climb. Then one night that silence cracked. The family had gone to bed, lanterns out the house, quiet except for the steady creak of the roof beams. May had just begun to drift when a faint glow flickered at the window. At first she thought it was lightning again, but then the smell of smoke curled into her lungs. Cyrus, she cried, bolting upright. He was already at the door, pulling on his boots. Outside fire licked along the barn's roof line, bright against the night sky. Sparks spat into the wind carried toward the fields. The animals inside shrieked and stamped in panic. Stay with the children, Cyrus barked, but May was already running after him, skirts catching in the dirt. Neighbors had not come. No one stirred from the town beyond. Whoever had lit the blaze meant for them to fight it alone. Cyrus ripped the doors open, coughing as smoke poured out. Horses screamed, Ben's calf bleated wildly. Without hesitation, May dove inside, wrapping her shawl around her mouth. She found Clara's favorite pony tangled in rope, eyes rolling in terror. Her fingers, though trembling, worked fast, slicing the knot with Cyrus's pocket knife. The animal bolted out into the night. May staggered back, hair-singed arms aching. Cyrus dragged buckets from the well, throwing water against flames that hissed and roared like angry beasts. The older children helped Thomas too, his face pale but his movements fierce, hauling water with all the strength his teenage arms could muster. May's heart thundered as she fought beside them, her body alive with fear, but steadied by a deeper force. She would not let this family lose another home, not while she had breath. Hours later, dawn broke through a haze of smoke. The barn's roof was half gone, but the animals lived and the fire had not reached the fields. Everyone was blackened with soot, coughing, trembling but alive. When the last flames hissed into steam, Thomas collapsed against the trough, chest heaving. His eyes, raw with exhaustion, turned to May. For the first time since she had arrived, he truly looked at her. You saved her, he whispered, voice cracking. Clara's pony, if you hadn't... May sank to her knees beside him, brushing hair from his ash-streaked face. I only did what any mother would do, she said softly. His lips trembled. I don't want to forget her, but maybe you don't want to replace her either. Tears blurred her vision. No, Thomas. I don't want to replace. I want to stand with you beside her memory, if you'll let me. He nodded barely, but it was enough. Something old and hard within him loosened. For May, it felt like chains falling to the dirt. That morning, as the sun rose red through the smoke, Cyrus stood beside her, his hand covering hers. They tried to break us, he murmured, but they only made us stronger. May looked at the children, at Thomas, wiping soot from Sarah's cheek, at Clara leaning against Ben, and felt it deep within she was no longer the barren woman cast aside. She was the root holding firm in a storm. For the first time in her life, she was not just surviving. She was needed. The fire had tested them, but May knew shadows still waited beyond the fence. Could love and the fragile hope it carried truly withstand what the world would hurl next? In the end, May discovered that what the world once called her greatest flaw was in truth her gift. She could not give Cyrus more children, but she gave something far rarer: patience, kindness, and the steady love of someone who had survived deep sorrow and still chose to remain open. His children, once wary, began to lean on her, not because of blood, but because they felt safe in her presence. The house, once heavy with grief, began to echo with quiet laughter again. And perhaps that is the lesson for us all. Life may not give us what we expected, but it can still surprise us with something better. Even when others tell us we are too old, too broken, or too late, we can choose to believe that love is not bound by age or by what we lack. It is bound by what we give. May's story reminds us that healing does not always come quickly, but it comes surely, like spring thawing the hardest ground. And it invites us to ask ourselves, where can we offer love today, even when the world insists we have nothing left to give? If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga, so you don't miss more tales that heal and inspire. Share this story if it reminded you of someone who still holds hope, and leave a comment. Would you like to hear more stories like May's, or perhaps the next chapter of hers? Because sometimes the stories we hold close are the ones that keep us alive.